Hello, welcome to episode 10 of The Outside Fence. We've reached double figures. Thanks for joining us again. I'm Tristan Heffernan. I'm your host, joined as always by my Melbourne racing expert, Stewart Brown. Balls, short meeting to go through at Moonee Valley on the weekend. Did you have any luck before the cancellation?
I did. I managed to find Alsvin in the first, so that was a good result. But I was a bit disappointed they called them off. As a lot of my better bets for the day were in the second half of the meeting. I had a couple of really good positions, but that's the way the cookie crumbles, I suppose.
Yeah, that's always the way. They never call them off when you get rolled in the last leg. Quick plug, obviously brought to you by teachmehorseracing.com, as we are every week. If you're looking to learn more about horse racing, doing the form, get along there and have a look, or feel free to jump on our YouTube channel and go through some old episodes. There's plenty of nuggets of wisdom there from Balls especially to go through. We're going to look through we're only going to look through two races from Moonee Valley this week, and we're going to go in the opposite direction as well later on in the show and duck up to Sydney to have a look at the Winx Stakes, which saw a number of spring contenders kicking off up there. First of all, though, we're going to talk about Moonee Valley, and the major talking point from the Valley, at least before it was called off, was the state of the track and the bias that eventuated. Now, first of all, I'm just going to read you a couple of quotes here, Balls, from Marty Synan, the track manager, when he was interviewed before the meeting on the Moonee Valley Twitter page. They put a video out, well worth watching. He said that he expected it to play a bit leaderish and on rail early. There's a little strip along the inside where our mowers go, so it's a bit firmer on the rail. But if they do cut into it, I think they'll get off it later in the day. Obviously, we didn't get to later in the day. And then he finished off by saying, I think early you'll need to be on pace and up the front. Marty knows exactly how his track plays, doesn't he, Balls?
He does. He's a very good man to listen to pre-meeting because he's generally very honest with how he thinks it'll play. He doesn't sort of try to hide any possible bias or anything like that. He lets the punters know exactly how it's going to play. So that's, I suppose, all you can ask for from your track manager.
Okay, and so he was spot on. We saw a lot of winners win, and the rail was the place to be. That's how it played out, wasn't it?
It did, yeah. So obviously we only got through 5 races on the day, but 4 of the 5 races were won by the horse leading on the fence, and then the other race was won by a horse that sat outside the leader. And yeah, pretty much unless you were on the fence, it was impossible to make ground. There's probably only one horse of note that did make ground out wide, any sort of significant ground out wide. And it was a very tough day. And yeah, the track started off a soft 7, but was quickly downgraded to a heavy 8 before the meeting started. And then after race 2 was a heavy 9. Then after race 3 down to a heavy 10, and then obviously eventually called off after race 5.
It was. Poor old Jungle Edge was giggling in his box, but he didn't even get to go out there. We're going to jump straight into race 1 here. Now, if you were on the ball and listening to Marty Synan and putting your faith in his thoughts on the track, this winner, Alsvin, was quite easy to find, Balls.
Yeah, it was. I managed to have something on it just based off how personally I expected the track to play, and then obviously also what Marty had to say. It's a sort of horse in the race who he was, as far as ability-wise goes, he definitely wasn't up to sort of some of the better horses in the race, but he had that all-important map advantage over a lot of his competitors, and he was the leader in the race. And that was obviously a giant advantage on the day.
All right, let's go to the replay here. And just to celebrate our 10th show, I've actually worked out how to pause these races. So I'm going to whack the pause button here, and we can go through with the horses to watch on the replay here, Balls. Now, the leader and eventual winner, Alsvin, drew gate 1, so he's there in the blue and lime green. Anything else we should keep our eye on for this replay?
Yep, so another horse to keep an eye out for is currently second last there in sort of the black silks with the white sleeves. That's the race favourite coming around. And another horse that you can keep an eye out for is Rivet Delight in the yellow colours, who's just outside Alsvin there. And I suppose another horse to keep an eye on if you're possibly can watch 4 horses at once is Miami Bound, who was the Oaks winner of last season. She's currently last at the moment, and for a lot of the race she struggles to sort of stay intact with the field and is sort of off the back of the field for a lot of the race, but sort of does her best work at the finish of the race. But so if we roll the vision now, you'll see Alsvin's booting up from the inside there to lead, and he's got Man from Uncle and sitting outside him, and then Odie and Rivet Delight just behind him. So obviously at this stage of the day where no one's aware, I suppose, that the track's going to play as it does, and everyone's thinking, most people would be thinking we've probably got a relatively fair surface. Obviously, the expectation was it would be possibly a bit leaderish early, but so Alsvin sort of strings them along here. They've only gone to slightly above average speed, so he sort of got it fairly comfortably after that bit of an early tussle for the lead. Now the thing with the favourite coming around is you see he pulls out wide down the back here. The issue at the start with him was he had 3 horses drawn inside him that all wanted forward positions, so it was going to be hard for him to really get up on the speed. So that's why he's settling back second last. Now, as you see, he's sort of 4 wide on the track here, and that's not a position on the day where many horses did anything. But he's sort of really putting in here and even looming into the race. At this stage, you would have thought he's maybe some chance of running down Alsvin, but obviously Alsvin's still on that fence, and is on his way to victory. One thing you'll notice here, Miami Bound, the horse from out the back, they're sneaking up the inside and runs into 4th position, just getting on heels late there. It was like a good effort, but the thing with her is, if we can probably pause it now, Hef. It's not a great sign that she, I suppose, couldn't really keep up early and stay intact. And then she has got home along the inside, which was the best part of the track. So to me, there wasn't a huge amount of merit in her run. And the jury's still out a bit given how poorly she performed in the autumn, whether she sort of still got the zest for racing or not. So she's still a watch horse, even at her next start. But as I mentioned, with coming around, it was easily the run of this race and possibly the run of the day even, given how wide it came on the track and given how no other horses really did anything in that sort of position for the rest of the meeting.
Yeah, I think especially as we go and look at the next race as well, there's, like you say, that 4 horses off the fence, the horses were going backwards all day there, so that adds a heap of merit. And really good point about Miami Bound, because there was a bit of a spruik for Miami Bound post-race from certain quarters on how well she did hit the line. But, she was on the right part of the track. You always got to be a little bit wary there. I don't think we can take much more out of that race, Balls. Leader.
One more thing we could probably add, if you could just rewind it back to the top of the straight.
Oh, geez, you're testing me there.
Is that possible? we could have checked out with that was, as far as recognising if there was a bias or not, you could definitely get a very good idea from that first race there that there was a massive advantage for the fence, because everything that was in the finish, bar the short price favourite, railed up on the inside, and all those horses out wide like Widgie Turf and Man from Uncle, they just sort of floundered as soon as they pulled out wide. Whereas the horses on the inside were the ones that making ground. So if you sort of put that together with Marty Sinon's words and your sort of own instinct with the rail being out 5 metres at Moonee Valley, you can sort of make a very good educated decision at that stage that, you want to be on horses that are going to race close to the speed and close to the fence.
Okay, and that's important to do every meeting, especially with these early races, is to look where the place getters have come from. And especially look where the favourites have travelled in the run, and because if you can jump on these track patterns before the market can, there's plenty of opportunity to make a quid. So definitely worth looking at there. Now we're going to go over now to race 3, which was for the 3-year-olds. There was a huge boom on Jenny's Rainbow in this race, Balls, off a synthetic win, but it's a whole new kettle of fish going from synthetic to a heavy track in town.
Yeah, it certainly is. If you said to me pre-race and even I suppose post-race, if you could take one horse out of this race, who would you want it to be? It would definitely be Jenny's Rainbow. But personally, she was a hard horse to back on the weekend, given the queries around going from synthetic to turf. Obviously, had never seen heavy ground before, and in her synthetic win, she had settled back in the field and made very strong ground late. So it was sort of assumed her racing pattern would be sitting off the speed.
Yeah, okay, cool. Let's go to the replay now for race 3. Now, keep in mind, we're on high alert about the rail and forward for this race. So we're going to just pause the replay again, A, because I've just learned how to, and B, because we're going to be able to point out where these horses finish. Now, the eventual winner, Dirty Thoughts, comes across here to sit outside the leader, which is Clean Machine, who runs second. And that horse there in the orange,
Chosen Blonde,
it sticks on for third. And the favourite that we were talking about there, Jenny's Rainbow, in the blue colours, up fourth. So you can see this race was dominated again by the on-paces, and in fact, this Dirty Thoughts was the only horse for the meeting who won off the fence. I'll throw it to you, Balls.
Yep. So yeah, if you run the replay now, you see Clean Machine crossing Chosen Blonde to find the fence there, and Dirty Thoughts up outside. At this stage, well, personally, I was on Clean Machine and Chosen Blonde, so I thought one of them would lead, and possibly the other would be sort of sitting behind the leader type sort of situation. So I was quite happy with things at this stage. But Dirty Thoughts has done a pretty good job here, considering the dominance of the fence on the day. Even though it has sat on speed, it's sat away from the fence there and been able to run down Clean Machine. So at this stage, you'll see Jenny's Rainbow pull out 3 deep. It seems to be travelling fairly well into the race. But as mentioned previously, sort of as soon as you're pulling out wide, sort of horses just seem to flounder. And that's what's happened with her there. And she sort of just whacked away, and she's been beaten the distance in the end. But yeah, to me, like a lot of horses on this program, a clear forgive run for me. And you can probably take some kind of positive out of the run for Jenny's Rainbow. The fact that she has settled so close there. Her first start, as I mentioned, she settled a long way back and flew home. Now she's been able to take a position up there, so that's probably sort of a tick for her, even though she's been beaten a fair way.
Absolutely, much easier to win when you can put yourself into a race. Where do we go here with Dirty Thoughts? Because I was impressed. I thought Clean Machine had his chance, or her chance, to win the race, given the lead. But even when I was watching the race, I thought, well, this is just going to be a matter of Clean Machine getting the chocolates. But Dirty Thoughts was too good. Where do you think he goes now?
Yeah, well, it's won 3 from 3 now, this preparation for Elleegant Zara, so it's definitely a horse on the rise, and it's sort of, I suppose, it's come through midweeks and obviously now onto a Saturday win. It'd be a sort of horse you'd have to sort of keep testing the bar. I think there's a 1400 at Flemington in a few weeks' time that I assume it could go to, and then I suppose if it was competitive there or ran well there, you could even eye off Caulfield Guineas or something like that. These 3-year-olds, they can obviously rapidly improve at this stage of their careers, so, and you're only 3 once, so it's obviously worth having a go at those sort of races while they're here. So if he holds his form, there's probably no reason can't go to a Caulfield Guineas or those kind of lead-up races.
Okay. Now, you found one here off the video, been beaten 10 lengths, but you think it's worth following next start?
Yeah, Yes Baby Yes from the Corstons yard. She came off a run at Flemington last start where she sat 3 wide, pretty much 3 wide on speed, and it was a fast tempo as well. And she held on okay. She didn't drop right out. She held on okay, which wasn't a bad run. Then on Saturday, she settled well back, and she found a lot of traffic. She obviously had no hope from the position she was in, but once she got clear in the straight, she actually finished off fairly well considering the position she was in. I know she was beaten 10 lengths, so it might seem a bit crazy that you could say that she has run well, but that was sort of the way the track was on Saturday, that you could easily forgive those sort of runs or even find some kind of positive in them. Now, I don't think she's any champion or anything like that, but if she can even drop back to the midweeks or find a week Saturday race, which can be pretty tough at this time of the year, say around that 1,100 metre mark, I think, she can possibly be a winner in the next couple of starts.
Excellent. It is important to note with these heavy tracks that the margins can definitely be exaggerated. So a 10-length defeat on a heavy track, it reads a lot worse than what it is. You saw how they strung out, and that was the pattern as the races went on. we saw horses struggling to finish in the 2,500 metre race. But that's going to wrap up our review of Moonee Valley. Now, we had a question in from Trav Noonan. Big shout out there. He's a very valuable Twitter follower if you're into especially the major races. He does a great job of assembling the likely fields a week out. He put the question in, nice and simple. Any horses or form out of this meeting that are worth following?
Well, I suppose the form as a whole out of this meeting, I wouldn't be paying too much attention to, given the severity of the bias and just how wet that track was. You can obviously I'll be forgiving a lot of horses out of it. Generally, I'd probably, as far as looking at their form, I'd almost just put the pen through any horse that failed on Saturday and just sort of go off their previous form. Now, as far as a horse to follow goes, obviously Yes Baby Yes is one sort of in lesser class, but the clear horse to follow for the day, as I mentioned earlier, was Coming Around in race 1. He was pretty much the only horse on the day to come out sort of 3 and 4 wide and make any kind of significant ground. Now, this horse, it's only had 3 runs in Victoria since coming from WA. It's still a horse that's on an upward spiral. So as far as sort of not reading too much into the form and that kind of stuff, I wouldn't like... I'd still take the run on merit that it's had on Saturday. And personally, for me, I'd be saying a horse like Coming Around, its reputation has been enhanced on Saturday, and it's sort of a better horse coming out of the meeting than I thought it was going in, even though I did sort of have a relatively high opinion of the horse.
Okay, what about horses coming out of this heavy track run? Do we think that possibly tears them apart for this preparation or brings them on fitness-wise? What would you sort of lean to there?
Yeah, well, that's a big concern out of this meeting, particularly the horses that were, say, first up or weren't sort of fully fit, is how they come out of this run, because it was such a testing track, and a lot of them have had very hard runs, as you can see by they were coming in like Brown's cows throughout the races actually did run. Yeah, if any of these horses, say, back up within the next 2 weeks, I'd be quite wary of... I'd have it in my mind for sure that they have had this hard run, and I'd be a bit wary in backing them. The tough thing for the punter is there's no way really of knowing how they have come through it until probably they do run. So it's more, I suppose, an educated guess that you have to make, but it's definitely something that I'd be keeping in mind. And also, obviously, the other thing out of this meeting to keep in mind is with the savage leader bias, not to get too excited about those horses that did lead on the fence or made ground on the fence, because they're obviously greatly advantaged.
Excellent. Dirty Thoughts, I think that's my one to watch from the meeting. I was very impressed with its win. We're going to go in the opposite direction for the first time now on the outside fence and head up to Sydney, where we're going to look at the first Group 1 of the season, the Winx Stakes. Is it harsh to call this a Group 1 barrier trial, Balls?
It's probably not harsh, considering there's a lot of horses that are first up in it, and there wouldn't be many of these that would have said this is our main aim for the preparation. There's obviously plenty of discussion about whether these sort of races should be Group 1s, I suppose, including, you can talk about the Moonee Stakes that's coming up this week, whether these sort of early spring 1,400-metre races should be Group 1s or not. They obviously feature a lot of horses, a lot of stayers that are resuming, and horses with greater targets down the track.
Yeah, okay. Let's go to the video. Now, this is a really important race to review because a lot of these horses have got major spring targets and aims, I guess you could say, in their sights. Now, this was won by Verry Elleegant, obviously a noted wet tracker, very, very good mare. She's back in the field here in those red colours. Can you point out a few for us to keep an eye on here, Balls? We're getting good at watching multiple horses in a race.
Yep, so I've got... a lot of the action, I suppose, at the finish of this race comes from horses that settled back in the field, as they did go at a genuine speed. So the horses that were in the finish, supposed to keep an eye out for, are Imaging, which is clear last at the moment in those greeny sort of colours. Fierce Impact, which is pretty much second last on the fence there in the yellow cap. And then the other horse to take note who's in the finish is Star of the Seas, which is about sort of fifth last out wide on the track there in the sort of black and yellow type hat. I wouldn't really watch him too closely. He's a nice horse, but he's sort of no superstar. The horse that had plenty of interest going into the race was Master of Wine from the Hawks stable. Actually started favourite in the race. It's about midfield at the moment in the blue with the yellow cap, those familiar Chautauqua colours. Those sort of horses are, I suppose, the ones to keep an eye out for at this stage.
All right, let's roll. There's plenty of quality here. Like you say, we got a genuine tempo. So would you say that augurs well for these horses moving forward?
Yeah, I definitely would. It should be, for a lot of these horses, it should be a good fitness base for them going forward. Obviously, a lot of them wouldn't be at their top at this stage, but it'd be a nice fitness builder for them. As you can see, there's sort of 3 across the track up front here at the moment, with Dreamforce outside Wolf sort of forcing the tempo on. Another horse to keep an eye out for, I suppose, is the Bostonian, who was the early favourite in the race. It gets a peach of a run here, sort of third the fence, and gets out when it wants. Now, Master of Wine, who I spoke about earlier, in the blue with the yellow cap there, he's wide no cover for pretty much the whole race. So they've gone at genuine speed, and he's sort of only run fairly, so you can probably forgive him. Whereas Verry Elleegant's made that wide looping run from the 600 and sort of hit the front here. Star of the Seas has come down the outside, looks to have it cold here, but Verry Elleegant fights back to win with Fierce Impact up the inside there, and then Imaging finishing off between horses.
Now, we've talked a fair bit recently about horses making that looping run, and we've talked about tempo. It can be advantage doing that when the tempo goes out of the race, and it can be hard to do that when the pressure was on. It looked like the speed was on here when Verry Elleegant took off around this field, and that's got to add huge merit to the run in my eyes. Yeah,
definitely. It was a win full of merit for sure. As I said, they have gone at genuine speed there, and there wasn't really a time in the race where they have sort of eased right off or anything like that. So, yeah, she's done a sensational job to make such a long run first up. She's obviously a horse that's sort of won over 2,400 metres, so she has those good stamina reserves to be able to make a long run, but to sort of do that fresh, all goes well for a great campaign for her.
Okay, let's talk Fierce Impact and Imaging. So they've came through on the inside there and run really well. I still wouldn't have them at the same level at Verry Elleegant off that performance, but they look to have a decent race in them this spring.
Yeah, well, Fierce Impact, he's very honest in these sort of 1,400, 1,600 metre races. They're right up his alley, and he's never too far away. He settled well back on the fence there, as we pointed out, but he got a pretty clean run through, and you'd say had every chance and was just beaten by a better horse on the day. Whereas Imaging drew wide, and they snagged from that gate back to last. And it found plenty of traffic, had plenty of traffic problems early in the straight, and had to sort of zigzag its way through the field. But it finished off hard once it was in the clear, ran the best last 200 of the race, and you probably could make an argument the horse with a bit more luck would have won the race.
Absolutely.
And Imaging's a horse, if that was its second run back, it hasn't done a huge amount since coming over for Chris Waller, but both its runs back now have been excellent. I'm assuming he'd probably targeted a race like the Epsom, and he seems to be right up to that, and he's right up to that sort of race this campaign, and he should be very hard to beat in it.
Okay, let's talk some of the Beaten Brigade here. First of all, the Bostonian seemed to have every chance there, and he was well beaten in the end. Can we make any excuse for him?
Yeah, he did have every chance. As I said, he box seated. And then got out at the top of the straight, and he sort of, I suppose, early in the straight he probably looked the winner, but he wasn't quite strong enough. The little thing you could say with the Bostonian, he did sit very close to a genuine speed there, and he's first up 1,400, probably the end of his distance range as well. So possibly them going the genuine speed sort of hasn't helped him. If it was more a sort of sit sprint affair, sitting so close to the speed, that would have been sort of right up his alley.
Okay, now Melody Bell, if you haven't heard the news, she's going back to New Zealand, so she was a bit disappointing there. We're not going to worry about Melody Bell. Let's talk about Master of Wine. Race without cover, yes. I'm still really disappointed in this run, and He doesn't look like a horse I could be backing next start by any stretch. I want to see much more from him before we start talking these big feature races that they've been really keen to target this spring.
Yeah, he probably was the disappointment of the race, given how good he was last campaign, and then obviously the wraps he had on him coming into this preparation. As I mentioned, he did sit wide, no cover for a lot of the race, so you could excuse him somewhat there, but he was still pretty plain in the finish. So he's obviously a horse who, well, I assume would probably go to a mile next start, maybe the Chelmsford Stakes in 2 weeks' time. So you'd probably want to have another look at him there. If he performs poorly there, then you probably can start getting a bit worried about a spring campaign. But obviously, if he performs well, then you know he's sort of back on track, and you can have a bit of confidence in backing him from then on.
I think the other point is that it wasn't just Master of Wine having a tough run here. Verry Elleegant's had a very tough run, and she's just kept on going with the job. So if she's capable of doing that and he's dropping off, I want to see more from him. One more horse that caught the eye down the outside there was the Derby place getter in Zabrowski. He looks to have come back reasonably well.
He does, yeah. He was ridden quite cold in this race, as you'd expect, but he's there in the orange colours in the picture there. He's actually finished off with the second fastest last 200 of the race, which is a pretty good effort for a stayer resuming. He's flashed past his stablemate Master of Wine. He's obviously in good hands in the Hawks stable. I think the Caulfield Cup's a race that's been mentioned for him. He ran second in the ATC Derby, so he's got that sort of pedigree to be a Caulfield Cup horse. And so, yeah, he's definitely a horse to keep an eye on as the distances get a bit longer.
Okay, excellent. There's a bit to take out of the Winx Stakes, but like I said, nice Group 1 barrier trial for a lot of those runners. That's it for us this week in terms of reviewing races, balls, but we do have a question to answer. Now, the jury's out on whether this is this person's real name, but we've got Pedro from Pontville has written in. Big shout out to you, Pedro. And he says, you seem to refer to times and sectionals quite a bit on the show. I'm wondering, how do you handle them from a meeting like Saturday on a very wet, deteriorating track? You can go with this one, Bowles.
Yeah, so I would probably guess Pedro isn't his real name. I don't know too many Pedros getting around at the moment. But thanks for your question, Pedro. Yeah, as far as Saturday goes with the very wet track, I pay very little attention to times or sectionals out of that meeting, given we started on a heavy 8 and ended on a heavy 10, borderline heavy 26, given they called them off. So it's not fair. Obviously, the horses who raced earlier in the meeting are going to have the better of the conditions. And then you've got to throw in as well the sort of savage track bias that there was there as well. Horses obviously trying to come wide on the track were greatly disadvantaged as well. So, yeah, as far as across the meeting goes on Saturday, I'm not sort of too interested in the sectionals. Race to race, or on a race on an individual basis, more so, I suppose, means something. But once again, you've got that track bias issue there where horses were in certain positions were greatly advantaged. So, yeah, a meeting like Saturday, I'm more interested in sort of where horses were settling and where horses were making their run, more so than sort of what kind of sectionals they were running on the day.
Yeah, put them in the bin, Pedro. That'd be my advice. But thank you for your question. We're bringing back the world famous takeaway of the week segment this week, Balls. We've pulled our finger out and come up with something ourselves. I'm going to let you go with this one. What can we learn from the past week?
Yep, so I suppose a common theme that we've talked about on the show tonight has been obviously the Moonee Valley track and how it played and things like that. So further to that, sort of knowing how tracks play in certain rail positions is certainly an important tool when it comes to punting. So at Moonee Valley, it's pretty much when the rail is in anything but the true position, when it's out at all. Generally, it's some advantage to race on speed and close to the fence. Obviously, that is varying depending how far the rail's out, and then obviously you can throw in the condition of the track too. So, for example, on Saturday, the rail's out 5 metres, and obviously you needed to be close to the fence. That was a fairly extreme case, possibly exacerbated by the by the very wet conditions. But yeah, going into those meetings, knowing when, say, particularly Moonee Valley with the rail out, I always just have the attitude that I think it's going to be on pace and close to the fence until I see otherwise. So you need to go in with an open mind, obviously. I don't do a lot of betting pre-meetings, so generally I'm sort of race to race, so I can sort of take into account that any bias on the day. But yeah, and then so obviously watch the first few races, see where the winners and place getters are coming from, where the favourite's settling and how it's running, and then you sort of make your mind up from there on how you think the track's playing. Another thing that you can do, I suppose, across all tracks, there's obviously various rail positions and a lot of rail movement going on that can affect how the track plays, is that you can keep a record on each track, sort of how the track has played when the rails are in certain positions, and obviously refer to that when they're coming to an upcoming meeting, either that or just look back at the past meetings and see how it's played. Obviously, you want to be comparing, say, the track condition, days where the track condition is the same as well, because that has a big bearing on how tracks play once again. So, just obviously keep that in mind. And another handy tool that I like to use is the Victorian Metro track managers generally will be interviewed a couple of days or a day before a meeting. And the good thing about them is they seem refreshingly honest about how they think the track will play. They're very punter-minded, it seems, and are happy to say if they think the fence will go off during the meeting or the fence will be the place to be, just like Marty Synan did pre the meeting on Saturday, was happy to say how he thought leaders would be advantaged, particularly early in the meeting. So definitely try and listen to those. Generally, they're on Twitter. The race clubs will put them out, or racing.com. So they're always good to listen to, just to give yourself a bit of a head start on how the track will play. Obviously, they're not always right, or it's not even an exact science or anything like that, but it just sort of gives you a bit of a head start on how it might play, and then you can obviously alter from there as the races are run.
Excellent, very good points. I couldn't say it enough. If you can nail these track patterns before the general population, there is an edge to be had there. Now, my takeaway is going to tie in very closely with that. If you're sick of track bias, this probably isn't the best show for you, because this was the major talking point, and this is a massive edge for your punting. When it comes to bias, I'm not saying you have to forget about the form, but if you can make a case at all for any horse who's going to be in the A1 spot, then you've got to go with it. A massive example on the weekend was the win of Roland Garros in that 2,500 metre Stain race. It was clearly outclassed, and that would explain why it was the 25 to 1. There was huge odds bet earlier, but it had the wet track form behind it, and the number one point was it was going to lead. So on that track, if it was ever going to be any chance, that was its day. And if you saw the race, it was about 6 in front round the bend. You've never seen a better watch in your life if you're on at the big odds. I wasn't on the big odds, so I'm not talking through my pocket here, but you can almost... You've got to have something on these horses that are suited A1 by the track bias. And on the flip side, it doesn't matter how good the horse is that you're backing, you're going to be very hard pressed to beat the bias when it's as savage as it was on the weekend. We talked about Jenny's Rainbow. I hate to think what Windstorm was going to try and do on that track. Probably very lucky for him that it was called off. But if you were awake early in the meeting, you could have looked late in the meeting for those back markers. You can lay them, and you can jump on the leaders late in the day, and you can back them, and hopefully you've beaten the market by the time the race comes around. So that's my takeaway. Go with the bias, and don't underestimate how much impact it can have on these savage days like Saturday. While we're at it, one more quick one. If you're going to have a multi, don't cash out halfway. What's the point of having the multi if you're going to cash out halfway, and then you'll be on the TAB's bloody social media pages looking like a total crank? That's a very quick one. If you want to put a multi on, put it on because you want to ride it out. That's it. That's it from me. Next week, Balls. Huge meeting coming up in Caulfield. Moonee Stakes Day. We've got the 2,000 metre race added after we lost it from Moonee Valley when they were called off. So 10 races to sink the teeth into. you're no doubt been going all Mike Pook on the weather. What have we got in store?
Yeah, we've actually bit of dirty weather Monday, Tuesday in Melbourne, but from Wednesday onward, it's relatively fine weather. So, as far as the track goes, I'm thinking possibly around the soft 5 range. I think it's about a soft 7 at the moment, so I'm not sure sort of how well it would dry at this stage. But yeah, it should get back to around the soft 5 range, rail back in the true position as well. So yeah, it should be a good day's racing. As you mentioned, the Moonee Stakes is on the first Group 1 for the season in Victoria. There'll be plenty of runners in that from the Lawrence Stakes that we looked at last week. And then also a bit of fresh blood. Having looked at the noms and without sort of diving too deeply into the race at this stage, I'd probably be looking at a bit of fresh blood, I reckon.
Yeah, if you haven't watched it, go back and look at our review of the Lawrence Stakes, because alarm bells are ringing on a few of these big names. Is showmanship in the noms?
No, it's not. I think it's running, possibly, there might be another 1,400 on the day it might be running.
Okay, just taking their time with them. The McNeil Stakes for the 3-year-olds. Love these early season 3-year-old races, but they can be tricky. Tell me this has got a bit more depth in it to it than the our Playboy race from a fortnight ago.
Yeah, definitely. This looks a lot better race off the noms. It'll obviously feature a few horses from who were due to run in the Mitchell Mackenzie last Saturday that obviously got called off, but also a horse like Tagaloa's resuming it. So it'd be good to see how he's come back. And there's also another couple of Group 3s, the Heath over 1,100 metres for the sprinters, and then the Cochrane Stakes for the mares over 1,200. I think the punter's Power Ruby Saki might be first up in that.
Excellent. Your Power, for sure.
She is a good filly or mare to follow.
Okay. Thank you, as always, Balls, for all your hard work and your willingness to back over the track bias issue over and over again on this show. We can't get through how important that is. Thank you to everyone who watched. Had some really great support on Twitter during the week. Thank you very much for that. Make sure you subscribe to the channel or give us a like. Everything helps to keep the show going. We like to know someone out there is watching, so thanks very much. Thanks again to all the questions. And that's going to wrap us up for this week, Balls. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Hef. See you next week.